A pleasure to meet y'all at last, and welcome back to films I should have talked about years ago. So now, I feel like that it's about time that we do get to talk about some international exclusives. I've talked a lot about various movies that have in fact only had releases, at the time at least, in certain parts of the world. But one of these, I'm pretty sure there has never been a single moment in my whole life that I've ever had any mentionings to Aardman Studios. You might remember them for the likes of Chicken Run, Shaun the Sheep, and in more recent years, in 2018, they made a movie known as Early Man. This is basically the depiction of their own, at least, that Nick Park himself came up with, as a ways of telling a backstory of how cavemen originated. It shows us a bit of a clip of the extinction of the dinosaurs, the famous KT event, which of course resulted in the Yucatan crater, which hopefully can still be visible today. But what happened was that when cavemen first started to walk the earth many years later, they themselves actually found the meteor itself that impacted Earth and left a huge crater. This crater, believe it or not, was actually in the right sort of shape to become a field. And as for the meteor itself, well, because of the way that it burned up in the atmosphere, it apparently was the shape of a ball. A ball that was big enough for them to manage. Though hot to the touch, these cavemen actually were dumb enough to create a sport. And that sport turned out to be football. Yes, for the record, it is basically just known as football. It's not called soccer, it's a worldwide sport. Why America does not get the idea that football is football. It's a white ball with black hexagons all over it. Sometimes it could be decked out thanks to the likes of Chelsea, A-Bar, and all these other amazing companies that have made soccer or football related stuff. No matter what name you call it, it's just a sport. It's not a debatable subject. But anyways, this was apparently how the sport itself originated. Originated at a point where cavemen were dumb enough to start playing with used meteorites that had burned up in the atmosphere at thousands of degrees, and of course with the crater itself serving as a playing field in which they were able to use rocks that happened to be in just the right shape, angle, and whatnot, to be used as goals. So that is apparently what the earliest known history of that point is. But many, many, many years later is where we basically get to see descendants of the earliest known type that would ever show up of this original caveman brethren. Basically, a young boy known as Doug wants to go out hunting with his family and friends. The rest of the cavemen in his own tribe are known specifically to hunt rabbits. But Doug himself actually wants to try and catch something bigger than rabbits. Possibly mammoths, or flying creatures, or creatures in the sea. Doesn't ultimately matter too much because the rest of the tribe doesn't necessarily have a full-on agreement with this. And it's mostly for good reason. Because these animals might actually get the best of them someday, and they do not want to take a risk with any of these larger creatures. Doug himself has a best friend, a wild boar known as Hognoth. And believe it or not, the many sounds that this pig makes, the grunts, the snorts, and all that, they were actually done by Nick Park himself. So, yeah, Nick Park's definitely had a huge run so far with all of his unique creations that he's done with Aardman and whatnot. But what we get to see here at some point is that after eventually catching a rabbit, they host their own celebration at night with a nice fire and the rabbit ready to cook. But unfortunately, terror comes upon them. Ginormous creatures that show up out of nowhere in the forest suddenly are visible, and the entire tribe tries to make a run for it, escaping to the Badlands that are basically outside of the crater itself. This is basically the area where such things, including volcanic activity and a blotted out sky, pretty much. It's not necessarily a very safe environment to be in, but regardless, they do try their best to get away from all of this terror that's now officially upon them. They try to make a living and possibly relocate, but Doug himself insists that they better go investigate and see what the problem is. After some time spent, he actually manages to find a way to apparently infiltrate a settlement that these intruders have actually created. It's basically a gate that locks in multiple ways. So the thing is that whatever this settlement is that Doug is now officially inside of, infiltrating undercover pretty much, he is inside a very secure and hostile area. An area that would never accept him for what he is. So he does try his best to evade any and all particular nonsense, and certainly does his hardest to evade as much security as possible, just so he can try to get some insight on what is going on. It turns out, though, they have a leader of their own, and they even have themselves sports that they do play, and other such stuff all over the place. Shops, housing, food, water, anything that you could possibly think of. This society pretty much has everything. Everything that could possibly overthrow the latest generations of the cavemen, or Neanderthal. That's pretty much what they are, but after some time, he eventually gets caught by security in a large stadium, after he basically fails to cough up money that is supposedly required for entry. See, what happens here is that he stumbles upon someone's room by accident and pretty much gets in kind of a wreck, to the point where he tries to make a run for it again, but he's apparently in someone else's clothing, and he's mistaken as a part of a group. And this group turns out to be a part of the stadium itself. This is in fact a stadium dedicated to the same exact sport that Doug's own ancestors used to play a long, long time ago. So that is insane, pretty much. This society has a huge knack for this exact sport known as football. And he apparently ends up in the crossfire with this. But eventually, he doesn't really do such a good job at it, and eventually has to go and submit to Lord himself. The Lord who's basically running the entire game and all operations that are happening within the society itself. His cover is completely blown, and eventually he ends up scoring a deal that if he could beat these guys in this sport, then he can reclaim his old land back along with the rest of his own tribe. So that was kind of the deal that would become sealed. And he would have to have the rest of his own tribe become his own team that faces off against the team within the society, simply regarded as the champions. But of course, in trying to do so, he doesn't really seem to have a good job doing that. Until eventually one night he does come across somebody within the society that he eventually makes a good connection with. They both escape from this society together, and eventually out into the Badlands, where the rest of Doug's tribe are located. So of course, after some training takes place, they eventually go and take on the champions themselves. The game itself is pretty packed up, and there is even a higher power above the Lord himself, a queen. So yeah, talking about a queen of an English movie, when we know about what happened to the real-life Queen Elizabeth II. Yeah, so that's pretty much what that is. But Anyways, the film itself certainly does have lots of twists and turns that you would not expect, but that's just the thing about it. Aardman Entertainment was able to bring along plenty of unique vibes in the same way that they were able to do in 2000 with their first film, Chicken Run, and then eventually with other things out there like Shaun the Sheep, The Pirates, Band of Misfits, and many more. If you really wanted to go back though with Aardman themselves, they themselves were known for making claymation shorts almost all the time, especially as far back as the mid-1970s. That is a long time ago when you really think about it, so that pretty much just sums this up in a nutshell. The film itself has a unique little ending though. They get their land back and they live happily ever after, continuing their lives of being rabbit hunters and all that good stuff, so that's just what I have to say about that. I will say that this is a pretty unique film for what it is, and there's certainly a lot of material to work with based on what the plot of this has to offer. The likes of Eddie Redmayne, Nick Park, as I've mentioned earlier, and not to mention other actors here and there, including Tom Hiddleston, they certainly do give up quite a nice vibe, unlike with a lot of films that we've seen in recent years. So I do feel like that this movie deserves not just any scoring, but a scoring of 8.1 out of 10.1. So it's rather confident in what it is as a feature-length film and as one of the latest that Aardman has to offer. And I'm more than sure that in more recent years they might have other stuff coming along the way as well. But only time will tell based on what they have in store for us. They were able to do very well with Chicken Run, and then of course with a lot of their other creations. Even Wallace and Gromit happened to really own up on their own behalf, because much like with some things that we've seen, they definitely have had a long run. Chicken Run is even supposed to have a sequel on the way, which might seem crazy, but that is just what they have in store for us. Well, anyways, if you want to see more, go down to my channel, then make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.